Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Janavallabha Giridvaridhari. Gopi Janavallabha Giridvaridhari. Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana. Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Gopi Janavallabha Giridvaridhari. Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai Rishabham Sabradharaj Jai Stote Srimad. A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki. Jai Rishabham Sabradharaj Jai Stote Srimad Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada Ki. Gaur Premanandi. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd Canto, Chapter 29, Explanation of Devotional Service, Text 9. Vishayan abhisandaya Yasha Aishvaryam eva va Achardha varchayed yomam Pritag bhava sarajasa Vishayan abhisandaya Yasha Aishvaryam eva va Achadavarchayed yomam Pritag bhava sarajasaha Vishayana visandhaya Yasha Aishvaryam eva va Achadav archayed yomam Pritag bhava sarajasaha Vaishnavis, Vishayan, sense objects. Abhisandaya, aiming at. Yasha, fame. Aishvaryam, opulence. Eva, indeed. Va, or. Achādau, in worship of the deity and so on. Archayet, may worship. Ya, he who. Mam, me. Pritak Bhava, a separatist. He, Rajasa, in the mode of passion. Translation. The worship of deities in the temple by a separatist with a motive for material enjoyment, fame, and opulence is devotion in the mode of passion. Purport. The word separatist must be understood carefully. The Sanskrit words in this connection are bina drik and pratag bhava. A separatist is one who sees his interest as separate from that of the Supreme Lord. Mixed devotees, or devotees in the modes of passion and ignorance, think that the interest of the Supreme Lord is supplying the orders of the devotee. The interest of such devotees is to draw from the Lord as much as possible for their sense gratification. This is the separatist mentality. Actually, pure devotion is explained in the previous chapter. The mind of the Supreme Lord and the mind of the devotee should be dovetailed. A devotee should not wish anything but to execute the desire of the Supreme. That is oneness. When the devotee has an interest or will different from the interest of the Supreme Lord, his mentality is that of a separatist. When the so-called devotee desires material enjoyment without reference to the interest of the Supreme Lord, or he wants to become famous or opulent by utilizing the mercy or grace of the Supreme Lord, he is in the mode of passion. Mayavadis, however, interpret this word separatist in a different way. They say that while worshiping the Lord, one should think himself one with the Supreme Lord. This is another adulterated form of devotion within the modes of material nature. The conception of a living entity as one with the Supreme, the conception that the living entity is one with the Supreme, is in the mode of ignorance. Oneness is actually based on oneness of interest. A pure devotee has no interest but to act on behalf of the Supreme Lord. When one has even a tinge of personal interest, his devotion is mixed with the three modes of material nature. Translation again. The worship of deities in the temple by a separatist with a motive for material enjoyment, fame, and opulence is devotion in the mode of passion. Om Gyanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivasati Gaur Bhaktavrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. This is a chapter of Bhagavatam that devotees, practicing devotees, often wonder about. Because it seems to be the right way to think that I'm doing bhakti, therefore I've got the real substance, I've got the real thing. That is true to one extent, but then again, it's not completely true. Just like when you have an unripe mango. In one sense, you do have a ripe mango, because in due course of time, the unripe mango will ripen, assuming that you leave the mango in the sun on your windowsill or something. In the same way, even a beginner has bhakti in terms of the seed. The seed contains the full potential. So actually, in one sense, you have that fullness of bhakti because you have the potential. And then if you follow the authorized processes, the potential becomes realized. In this way, as explained in one Bhagavatam purport, even the neophyte in bhakti is unconsciously liberated. The example I often give is if one of the little children there, Achyuta Baba Devi Dasi's child, if you put a diamond in the child's hand, what's the child going to do with the diamond? Probably try to throw it around or swallow it or something. But the fact is the child has a diamond, whether the child realizes it or not. Now, we hope that as the child gets older, the child becomes more conscious, and through social enculturation and family instruction, the child starts realizing, wow, I have a diamond in my hand. I'm loaded. I'm rich. Similarly, as we progress in bhakti, we start to become more conscious of what we already have from the very beginning. So yes, in that sense, everyone has pure bhakti. Number one, first of all, because that's their original constitutional position. And number two, because the potential for reviving it is there. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu explains, as recorded in Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, Nitya Siddha Krishna Prem Saju Kabunoy Shavanade Chuddha Chitte Koraye Udoy. Pure love of Krishna is eternally established in the heart of the living entity. And it can be revived by the authorized process of hearing and chanting about Krishna. Our problems are that we have forgotten love of Krishna. But everyone wants love. Just look at the human form of life. The ladies want love. They'll immediately admit that. The men want love too. They'll grudgingly admit that. But everyone wants love and to be loved. You want at least one person to love you. You want children to love you. You want your neighborhood to love you. You want society to love you. Oh, if the whole world could love me, how glorious that would be. We're love-starved. And bhakti recognizes that. What we're actually starved for is pure love. Material existence, as you know, presents all kinds of polluted loves. There's a glimmer of hope in them because such perverted loves are based on the pure love that exists in the relationship between Krishna and his parts. So we're love-starved, searching for that pure love which you cannot find on the material platform, no matter how hard you try. This is why in the very beginning of Bhagavatam, the conclusion is there. Savai pumsam paro dharmo yato bhakti vatokshate. Ahoy tuki apratiyata yaratma supersediti. The only way you are going to be satisfied, the only way I will be satisfied, is through pure love. That means pure service. When there's no hetu, that Sanskrit term means cause, no material cause for what you're doing for Krishna, then there's no interruption. The interruption in our bhakti is because of material motivations. And as long as those material motivations are there in our bhakti, there's no yenatma supersedity. Our core being, our real self, cannot be fully satisfied. So bhakti is really getting you to face the realities of existence. It's not a flight from realities. It is embracing the ultimate daily present reality that we are love-starved, and that starvation cannot be satisfied except through pure devotional service. Only then will the Atma truly be satisfied. But we try so many ways to satisfy our hearts. And this is what results in the struggle for existence. I was explaining to devotees in China yesterday the real reason for fatigue. We briefly touched upon it, I believe, last week here. Everyone knows what it's like to be tired in the ordinary sense. You try to take more rest, you try to relax, you go on a holiday. But the fatigue that the Bhagavatam is referring to is that inescapable, unerasable, deep sense of exhaustion in the core of your being from having repeated birth and death and making the same mistakes again and again. Fatigue comes from material attachment. This is maybe hard for us to realize at first because material attachment seems so normal. I mean, everyone's doing it. Everyone's feeling material attachment. Why single me out, you know? Yeah, you got to get over it eventually, but it's just like water, air, fire. It's just there. At least let us understand that material attachment is what produces this unerasable fatigue. Unerasable materially. You can't stamp it out, this weariness, the drudgery that you try to relieve through intoxication or sensual indulgence or just a hobby or burying yourself in work or establishing a huge dynasty or clan around you. What Shukadeva Goswami calls the fallible soldiers, as Prabhupada translates the term. Some or other escape from this numbing, gnawing feeling in the core of your being that I'm tired and I can't erase this sense of fatigue, cosmic or existential fatigue. Human beings are starting to experience that these days, even as children, especially these days as teenagers. And by the time human beings, especially in the first world we're talking about, by the time they reach their early 20s, they've had it. They're just depleted. They're just like empty shells of even their material self. Forget spiritual self, but empty shells even when perceived from the material plane. So this fatigue that you can't stamp out, it's like gorse. You can't get rid of that weed. It takes a full-on program of dragging out the gorse plants from the very root, burning them. This fatigue comes from karmic activity. That seems a bit exotic to us because we have this contamination that, what's wrong with a bit of karmic activity, you know? A little bit. Don't overdo it. But you got to act for yourself in this world. You've got to arrange things for yourself. Otherwise, you know, how are you going to go on with your spiritual life unless you please yourself? Krishna ought to know that. Krishna ought to know that. You need to please yourself just a bit, and then you'll be more steady in his service. Yeah, that's it. That's the bhakti knowledge. Yes. Those are the classes we'd like to hear. Unfortunately, Bhagavatam doesn't give those classes. The proof of our not hitting the mark precisely is our fatigue. That fatigue comes from a material attachment, and material attachment results in karmic activity. So karmic activity is not innocent. It's what's making us exhausted. Bhagavatam is training us to see the fault, to see the actual source of the problem. So what about the different types of bhakti? First of all, the acharyas, Srila Prabhupada, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, in commenting on this section of Bhagavatam, make it clear to us that bhakti is one. Actually, when you talk about bhakti, you're just talking about pure devotion, Shuddha Bhakti. That is the eternal reality. But conditioned souls, in approaching that oneness of bhakti, bring different attitudes to the table, so to speak. Different conceptions, different motivations, and therefore Lord Kapila Deva is describing to his mother various influences that can be imposed upon pure bhakti, making it seem like there is devotional service, bhakti in the mode of passion, the mode of ignorance, the mode of goodness. So it's kind of a delicate subject matter. It's like you're in a room and assuming the room has pure air in it, and then into that room of pure air floats some fragrance of various types, which, so to speak, color the atmosphere. So this is what we do. We bring various fragrances to bhakti. In response to a question by Devahuti, Lord Kapila Deva is enunciating these aspects of bhakti. She asked him various questions, remember, for our benefit. She asked him about time, and she asked him about the various practices of bhakti. And Lord Kapila Deva showed compassion to her, as we discussed last week, because she was asking those questions out of compassion for others. This teaches us that if we want to attract the attention of the Supreme Personality of Godhead upon ourselves, then we show compassion to others. If we're showing compassion to others, certainly Krishna will show compassion to you. Because he says in Bhagavad Gita, no one is more dear, nor will there ever be one more dear. So a big part of our bhakti are the activities of compassion. And you don't wait around until you feel compassionate and then you engage in activities of compassion. You take the order Mahaprabhu has ordered. Wherever you go, whomever you meet, teach the science of Krishna. So we act on that order, and in this way, our compassion develops. But if we just sit around and wait until we feel compassionate, that is not the way our original spiritual health returns. We act according to the executive order. Just like in the USA, they often have commotion because it seems the president of the USA has some powers to issue what are called executive orders. He doesn't have to go through the legislative chambers. And so Often people complain, this is not democracy. You've got to go through all the legitimate procedures. You can't just invade Iraq or, harass Iran. You've got to first get permission from the various, like what you call here, the parliament. You've got a due process. And then if the president is kind of high on his horse, which sometimes happen, like now, then, it's just because I say, I hereby declare. So executive orders in the material world are always controversial, but in bhakti, we are doing our practice because of executive orders. Even our showing compassion doesn't wait for us to feel compassion. We do the activities because the Supreme Physician has ordered us to. Chaitanya Vaidya. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the Supreme Physician, the Supreme Doctor, and he's given us our regimen so that our health can return. When this section of Bhagavatam first came out in the mid-70s, 1974. I remember devotees debating this. Now, devotional service can't be in the mode of passion, ignorance, or goodness. So, all right, but we're reading this, it must refer to others. It doesn't refer to us. Because after all, we are devotees. I remember one of my godbrothers was on a morning walk with Srila Prabhupada, and he asked him a question about this section of Srimad Bhagavatam. He said, Srila Prabhupada, in chapter 29, it's described devotional service in the mode of goodness, passion, and ignorance. Prabhupada, does that apply to your disciples? Prabhupada was walking, and suddenly he stopped and planted his cane and looked at the devotee and said, "Who is my disciple?" The devotee was taken back. And the devotee thought for a while and then replied, "Your disciple is someone who follows thoroughly your instructions. So does that section of Bhagavatam apply to them?" Prabhupada looked at him and said, "No." So that sounds pretty cool, doesn't it? Except, who is my disciple? In other words, if you're a real disciple, then by virtue of the executive orders of the parampara, you are oneness. You have oneness with Krishna in terms of your interest perfectly coincides with Krishna's through parampara. That's the mystery of the Guru parampara. It is the eyeglasses through which you can see Krishna, and it's the motorway for driving in a way that's 100% in line with Krishna's desires. So let's talk a bit about devotional service in the mode of ignorance. That means, as we heard in text 8, a person who is envious, proud, violent, and angry. How could that be? Envy is so omnipresent in the material world. That's a symptom of ignorance. Because envy and anger are twins. Why are you better? Who do you think you are? You can just feel the pollution rising up in you. How dare you disagree with me? My plans are totally what Krishna wants. How are you to have another vision? We have to be careful about that. In the name of serving Krishna, we trample someone who disagrees with us. We need to be careful that we don't use devotional service as an assertion of pride. I know I've got it together. Who are you to say anything? What do you know? What have you done? What service have you done compared to me? And it can even get worse. Devotional service tainted by ignorance, tamoguna, can get worse in terms of violence. You see in fanatical applications of religions in the world. When we exterminate all the non-believers, then we go to heaven. In the Middle East, terrorists, of course, practically everyone except the terrorists will recognize that this is a totally extreme and dangerous concoction. But terrorists are taught in some parts of the Middle East. Become a suicide bomber and you blow yourself up, killing others, all for the sake of Allah, and then you go to heaven. And especially if they're men terrorists, they're taught, when you blow yourself up and go to heaven, there are 90 virgins waiting for you. So that really inspires, yeah, I'll go for that. So this is ignorance, causing havoc in the name of religion. Therefore, we're fortunate to have Lord Kapila delineating these contaminations so we don't fall into the same trap. Next we go to today's verse, a devotional service tinged by the motive of, and this is much more familiar, the envy we know about, but violence and anger, pride we know a bit about too, the other mode of ignorant stuff. But mode of passion is more our home playing field, right? A motive for material enjoyment, fame and opulence is devotion in the mode of passion. That translates into turning Krishna into our order supplier. As Prabhupada writes, the interest of such devotees is to draw from the Lord as much as possible for their sense gratification, like you draw water from a well. Similarly, you draw from the Supreme Personality of God as much as you think you can squeeze out for your material benefit. There's no reference to the interests of the Supreme Lord. What does Krishna want? Instead, I'll do bhakti because I want to be comfortable, I want to be prosperous, I want to be famous. And so therefore, as Prabhupada writes, he wants to become famous or opulent by utilizing the mercy or grace of the Supreme Lord. This is all mode of passion. A real devotee begs to have the consciousness of sharing Krishna's desires. What Krishna wants, I want. We beg for that opportunity. Now, it's surprising that in the days of idealistic romance, many of you are too young to remember those days. Idealistic romance was the standard, the gold standard, back in the 50s especially. If you listen to songs and music from the 50s, it was all about pure romance. And now, by now, after heaps of wildness, everyone is cynical and burned. More businesslike, you know. But in the days of pure romance, In some parts of the world, it's still prevalent, although fading. When I would go to Russia, there would be that sentiment still there. But in most parts of the world, especially New Zealand, things have become very businesslike, you know. You sign the prenup, you know, the prenuptial agreement. In the unlikely event that we separate, whatever assets each one of us has brought to the relationship remains with that person. So it's always a question of when do you bring up, before the marriage, when do you bring up the prenup? How do you say it? It's become the most tricky and pressing issue. How do you broach the subject? When are we going to sign the prenup, dear? So, in the classic idealistic conception of pure romance, there's always this notion that the two will become one. We'll live in perfect harmony. I remember I was with Anantanag Das coming from India to the UK, and there was this in the airport lounge at the same time as us was a young couple, children of devotees in their early 20s, and they had just married. And so they came over to greet me because I knew the parents. And afterwards, when I eventually got to the USA, I told the ladies' parents what was going on. They were in that stage, you know, where one would look this way and the other one would look that way. One would make a sound, the other would, Remember that? Some of you can remember that stage. Their violins are playing and they seem so coordinated together. Yes? You moved your eyebrow? Did I catch that? Was there something special that you meant? Is there something else that you want? And so Anantanag and I were just watching them. We just were there with them for about a couple of hours. And it just went on and on. You know, they'd just been married they're on their round-the-world honeymoon trip going to various temples. And so for 2 hours, we got a bit exhausted watching because how'd they keep it up? Just tuning into one another completely. Making sure they're always on the same frequency. That's the classic standard of idealistic pure romance. Where do we get that from? We get that from Goloka Vrindavan, which is the capital, the citadel of pure love. But our mistake is that we expect it in the material world. But anyway, when I finally got to the USA, I was telling the girls' parents about it. And of course, we laughed about it. The parents are happy because these children had gone through all the phases very nicely. They didn't have a tumultuous teenage years. They didn't have multiple relationships. It was just like the ideal, old-fashioned way. So we were happy for them. At the same time, everyone knew, not just the sannyasi, but the parents of the girl knew that phase is not going to be forever. Sooner or later, there's going to have to be some negotiation, arbitration, argy-bargy, whatever you want to call it. But it was nice to see, you know. There's a couple, they had done everything nice. Their parents had raised them so nicely, and the children had listened to their parents and avoided the teenage devastation. Now they're in their mid-20s and they're marrying, and when they have the idealistic conception, this is her first boyfriend, and she's married him. This is his first girlfriend, and he's married her. And it was just the gingerbread house in the forest, you know, with whipped cream and a cherry on top. And were happy for them, you know? And that's actually what everyone wants. The dream of eternal love. We get that from Krishna Lila. Only Krishna can fully satisfy our loving propensity. This is the first lesson in Nectar Devotion, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Pure love means we share 100% Krishna's interests. We're one with Krishna in that way. And the purpose of sadhana bhakti is to act on the executive orders of the parampara so that your original spontaneous love for Krishna, attraction for Krishna, that raga starts to come out. This is the result of properly following the guru physician who is representing Chaitanya Vaidya, the supreme physician, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who is Radha and Krishna combined. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has the form of Krishna and the heart and emotions of Srimati Radharani. The complexion of Srimati Radharani also. Therefore, the Acharyas point out, Sri Krishna Chaitanya, Radha Krishna Nayanya. Lord Chaitanya is Radha Krishna combined. Loosely, devotees refer to Lord Chaitanya as Krishna. He's the most merciful appearance or incarnation of Krishna. But actually, when you study Chaitanya Charitamrita carefully, you find Mahaprabhu is Radha and Krishna combined. The two, Radha and Krishna, become one. And also the one, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, becomes the two, Radha and Krishna. And this going back and forth, so to speak, because we can only explain with material logic and cause and effect. This going back and forth between the oneness, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and the two-ness, Radha and Krishna, is all based on exchanges of pure love. So our goal is to share Krishna's interests 100%. In Krishna's Leela, even when the residents of Vrindavan apparently are doing puja for demigods, it's all for attaining Krishna. In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, those who are unintelligent worship the demigods, and they don't understand that the boons are actually fulfilled by Krishna, because Krishna is the ultimate cause of all causes. But in Braj Leela, you see the Brajbasis worship demigods, but it's all 100% for Krishna's pleasure, for Krishna's protection, or to gain Krishna's association, just like the Varna Hastra Leela. It's a confidential Leela, Krishna stealing the clothes of the Braja Kumaris, the unmarried young ladies of Vrindavan. Their hearts burned with a desire to have Krishna as their husband. Their hearts burned so much that Kavi Karnapur says when they were sleeping at night, they would wake up in the middle of the night because of a burning heart, desire for Krishna. I don't know if you've ever longed for something so intensely that you woke up in the middle of the night because of that burning longing, but this is how much attracted they were to Krishna. So, the time of the year was coming, Margashirsha, which is, you may recall from Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, of the months of the year, I am that. It's a celebratory time according to the Indian sequence of seasons, because it's the time when the grains are harvested, so everyone is joyful. Krishna also says he's the flower-bearing spring of seasons. I am spring, because everyone likes springtime because it's neither hot nor cold and the flowers and plants are blossoming. But of months, Krishna says he's that. Roughly mid-November, mid-December. Of course, it changes according to the calendar. So, the Vrajakumaris wanted Krishna. Their parents were thinking, it's time for them to start thinking about a husband. So we're happy that they're going to do the usual rituals of worshiping Katyayani. Generally speaking, she's Durga, but Durga is simply a department, so to speak, of Yogamaya. So you can look at it in both ways. But let's just consider that they're doing demigod worship. So the parents are thinking, okay, yeah, it's that time. You should be thinking about a husband. We're happy for you. And the Vrajakumaris are thinking, we're doing this just to get Krishna. We want Krishna. So the parents, Kavi Karnapur explains, were a little concerned. Oh, we hear that you're going to do the Katyayani Vrat, the vow, the month-long vow to please Katyayani so you'll have good husbands. We appreciate your motivation, but this Vrat is a bit severe. So the parents try to discourage them from rigorously performing the vow, month-long vow. But the Vrajkumaris were a little despondent hearing that, the discouragement. In any case, they still made plans to do it. For one whole month, that meant bathing in the Jamuna early in the morning in the biting cold. It also meant, and could you do this, simply eating for 1 month unspiced dal and rice, plain dal and rice with no spices, nothing else, for 1 month. Now you're probably thinking, yeah, we could do that. What's the big deal? Try it. I know for myself, I eat a very simple breakfast. That's what they tell me anyway. Like buckwheat porridge, no sugar, and alternate that with amaranth, no sugar, and pumpkin seeds, flaxseed oil. Yummy, huh? But once a week I deviate. I tell whoever's cooking, you can make whatever you want. I'm tired of this. 6 days. So I have my deviation. I call it deviation breakfast. Because day after day, it's enough to drive me crazy. It doesn't. Unspiced buckwheat with no sugar. Pumpkin seeds. Okay, the pumpkin seeds are roasted so you can chew them, but still. Of all the senses, Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, the tongue is the most difficult to control. We control it through Krishna Prasad. We eat actually to please Krishna so that we can engage in Krishna's service. So I eat that way, not to demonstrate that I'm some kind of austere yogi, but because that's the best way I can do service. It's what I can digest. But still, once a week, I had to break out of that mold. Now the Vrajakumaris, for 1 month, it's going to be Havishyan, it's called. It's going to be just unspiced plain dal and rice, boiled. Try it. So they were doing all that. to worship the demigoddess Katyayani. It sounds like an ulterior motive, doesn't it? Separatists, they're worshiping demigods for the sake of getting a nice husband. So they were doing the ritual that anyone who's worshiping demigods for prosperity, husband, wealth, and so on, they're doing the same ritual, but the purpose is 100% different. We want Krishna as our husband. So the Shastra describes how in doing this vow, the austerities seem to take a toll on their beautiful appearance. But of course, there's no deterioration in Krishna Lila. They're just different types of beauty. So they didn't do their oil massage every day, so their skin apparently became affected. They didn't put oil in their hair, so their hair started looking dry. They were becoming very thin. Their jewelry was becoming very weighty on them because they were becoming very thin. But this is just another way of spiritual beauty, spiritual attractiveness. So they would wake up early in the morning. It's cold. And the young girls would gather together, singing about Krishna. And they would hold hands as they walked to the Yamuna River. Why? Well, it was dark and they didn't want to stumble and fall. But the real reason they held hands while they were walking is because they were overwhelmed with ecstatic love for Krishna. They had to steady one another as they walked. And they're having kirtan. They're singing about the glories of Krishna as they approach the Yamuna River. So they first take a bath in the Yamuna, and then, remember, the Yamuna is biting cold. The acharyas point out that before they first enter the Yamuna, they're putting on their bathing garment, and it's cold, and so they're demonstrating their reaction to the cold by slapping their arms and putting their legs in a funny position, just who's cold. And then they would enter the Yamuna, and the Yamuna is so glad to receive them. So then they come out, and it's time to put on their finest clothes because they're going to do puja on the bank of the Yamuna to Katyayani. The puja ingredients have been carried by their assistants, the manjaris. So the Vrajkumaris find a very appropriate place on the bank of the Yamuna. When animals haven't been, they find a very pure place. Of course, everything in Braj is pure, but they're doing everything to please Krishna. So they want the vrata, the vow, to be successful. Therefore they bathe, they've dressed in fine saris, they found a perfect place on the bank to do the Katyayani puja. And they make a deity out of sand on the bank of the river. The idea is to make that deity and invite her to come, invoke her presence, and then make a request. So the usual request is give me opulence, give me a rich husband who will give me 10 children, and it'll all be smart, and that's the usual prayer. But they're worshiping Katyayani simply to have Krishna. So they make their famous mantra, their famous prayer you'll find in the 10th canto of Bhagavatam. Katyayani Mahamaye Mahayogin Yadishpari. Oh, Katyayani, the powerful energy. Mahayogini, oh, mistress of yoga power. Adishpari, supreme controller. Nanda Gopa, Sutam Devi, that son of Nanda Gopa. Pattame Kudute Nama, make him our husband. We want that son of Nanda Gopa to be our husband. So they're doing all the demigod puja, simply 100% to attain Krishna. And there are details given about how when they do various aspects of the puja, they're always requesting, like, please accept this incense, this fragrant incense. May we share in the fragrance of Krishna's form. Everything they offered was always with the supplication, let's share Krishna's fragrance. Let's share in Krishna's association. Let's share in the limbs of Krishna. So this is 100% pure bhakti, although apparently they're doing demigod worship. But they have no separate interest. All they want to do is satisfy Krishna. All right, any questions? Or are you all on the bank of the Yamuna? First, Nitai Chand Prabhu had his hand up.
We get so much encouragement, and we get so much attraction to Krishna in the association of devotees. When we find that, like, some of the boys who live in ashram, like you're saying, or even brahmachari ashram, have to go, their visa runs out and they have to go back to another country, or you have elderly parents who have to be taken care of or something, you suddenly find yourself, or like in your case, you're always just traveling, but you find yourself not able to be in the association of the devotees who helped you so much. Should you take that as a test from Krishna, or is there a better way to look at it?
All you can do is your best. Try to do everything in your might to be an enlivening association in a situation that is favorable to your bhakti development. We're not the supreme controllers. But Krishna is in the heart. He knows when you're sincerely trying your best. That means gradually it'll become obvious through thick and thin that Krishna has never shortchanged you. But that'll take some time to see. Because we're accustomed to thinking, I know what's good for me, and you're entitled to make the best arrangements that you can. Just like with the departure of Vaishnavas, we want them to stay. But then we have to accept that Krishna has his plan, he knows what's best. So similarly for us, we may want to stay in a particular country. I know when I'm at the Loft or the Bhakti Lounge in Wellington, and there are travelers from all over the world, even now there's still so many travelers, and they always ask me, is there a place like this in my home country? And first they assume, oh, no problem when I leave, because there'll be a place like this in France or Germany or whatever, Sweden. And then I have to kind of tactfully tell them the truth. I'll try to put you in touch there in your home country with someone who can help you. That's as best I can do. So you try your best. That's all you can do. Just like health. You try your best to take care of your health, but the body will break down. These things happen. They will happen. Just like we've entered this coming decade what my godbrother Burijan Prabhu calls the decade of tears, because so many of Prabhupada's disciples will be leaving. That's just a fact of existence. You can pray, my dear Lord Krishna, please let them stay, but Krishna has his plan. So all we can do is our best. And yes, we should try to stay in a situation that's best for our bhakti. But Krishna won't shortchange us. We try our best. Some or other, Krishna will, if we're sincere, Krishna will make it so that we can still advance in our spiritual life. How, we may not be able to see. Just like upon the departure of a great devotee, the disciples think, how will we go on? But then Krishna in the heart takes over and starts to reveal for those who are sincere. So all you can do is your best. That's why Krishna tells Arjuna in Bhagavad Gita, Mama Nusma Yujam Cha, fight and think of me. Victory or defeat is not your concern. I know for myself, I'm not going to explain the whole story now, but I've had the closest association with Prabhupada in the most devastating defeats during the Soviet bloc days, the most devastating defeats. So we can only do our best. Our concern is how to offer our best. That's all we can do. We're tiny. And Krishna in the heart knows our sincere desires. Parthasarathi, Devidas, you had your hand up?
I was just thinking about when you were talking about some of the terrorists, and I was thinking how Krishna also sometimes motivates, or not in the Bhagavad Gita, he motivates Arjuna. He motivates Arjuna by saying that if he fights, then he will get pleasure in heaven. He will enjoy in heaven. But obviously that's different.
Oh, definitely different. It's Dharma Yuddha. It's a battle based on Dharma. And there were no civilians whatsoever involved. War these days means what? First, devastate the women and children. That's considered barbaric. But the idea is, by devastating the civilians, the women and children, then the people will pressure the government to surrender. That's the thinking. All the nuclear powers have done that. They've targeted with their nuclear weapons civilian places where there is civilian population. And how do they explain it away? Well, what's that air base called in Hobsonville or Fenupai? Huh? Fenupai Air Base. Well, there are people living around there. We shouldn't normally target that with our weapons, but that, even though there are people living around it, it's an air base that could be used against us. So what can we do? Collateral damage. That's how the military leaders consider. In whatever city, millions of people living, but in that city is a factory that manufactures an ingredient that can be used against us. So we have to attack the city. That's how they think. All of them do that, U.S. included. They have all these lists of nuclear targets. And they're where people live. But they rationalize in that way. You've got to wipe out anything that could be used against you. So there's a factory in Kumu that's making, who knows, some little electronic part that could be used by the defense industry. We've got to nuke the place. That's how they think. Civilians dying, women and children dying, that's collateral damage. So Kurukshetra is not like that. That's why to fight the battle of Kurukshetra, the warriors, only the warriors, and they weren't conscripted fighters, they weren't draftees, they were professional military warriors. They went to a deserted part. Even today in India, Kurukshetra, you go there, it's just out in the middle of nowhere. And they fought it out without harming the civilians. Now, Yudhisthira is so soft-hearted, and Arjuna was so soft-hearted, as you read in Bhagavad Gita, that they lamented that so many warriors would die and leave women without husbands. But there was no slaughter of women, and no slaughter of children, except what Ashvatthama did, which was considered totally abominable. Nowadays, that would just be considered, well, tough luck. So there's no correspondence between a Dharma Yuddha, a battle based on Dharma, and what these crazed terrorists are doing under the influence of the mode of ignorance. Yes. Karma yoga means you're offering the fruits to Krishna, but you're attached to acting in a certain way. So there's still some personal interest. I like acting in this way, but I'm going to give the results to you, Krishna. Just like in the next verse, we didn't talk about devotional service tinged by goodness, but that's about performing devotional service to become free from karma, or for liberation. Also, the acharyas point out, following varnashram dharma can also have an element of personal interest. I like doing my varna, I like doing my ashrama, it's my thing. It can be like that. Just like the kids like running around making noise. So I like performing my varna, my ashrama, I'm attached to it, and I'm offering the results to Krishna. And I'm happy that I'm not going to get karma, and I'm happy that I'm not engaged in fruitive activity. Full bhakti, as I often explain, is whatever Krishna wants, however Krishna wants it. But most devotees will be happy they're performing karma yoga. We need more karma yogis. You want to make money? You like make money? Make money for Krishna. You like having children? Have children and raise them in bhakti. Okay? More? Yes.
How can we increase our progress?
How can we increase our progress in bhakti? Well, that's the whole practice. That's the whole science. Do everything. And the basis of doing everything in bhakti is hearing and chanting about Krishna. Let that fuel all your other activities. All right. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.